Good morning or good evening. Today we're going to continue reading in Stewart Little. This is chapter 9 called The Narrow Escape. Margalo liked it so well at the Littles' house she decided to stay for a while instead of returning to the open country. She and Stewart became fast friends, and as the days passed, it seemed to Stewart that she grew more and more beautiful. He hoped she would never go away from him. One day when Stewart had recovered from his bronchitis, he took his new skates and put on his ski pants and went out to look for an ice pond. He didn't get very far. The minute he stepped out into the street, he saw an Irish terrier, so he had to shinny up an iron gate and jump into the garbage can where he hid in a grove of celery. While he was there, waiting for the dog to go away, the garbage truck from the Department of Sanitation drove up to the curb, and two men picked up the can. Stewart felt himself being hoisted high in the air. Excuse me. Stewart felt himself being hoisted high in the air. He peered over the side and saw that in another instant, he and everything in the can would be dumped into a big truck. If I jump now, I'll kill myself, thought Stewart, so he ducked back into the can and waited. The man threw the can with a loud bump into the truck, where another man grabbed it, turned it upside down, and shook everything out. Stewart landed on his head, buried 2 feet deep in wet, slippery garbage. All around him was garbage-smelling straw. Under him, over him, on all 4 sides, garbage. Just an enormous roll of garbage and trash and smelly. It was a messy spot to be in. He had egg on his trousers, butter on his cap, gravy on his shirt, orange pulp in his ear, and a banana peel wrapped around his waist. Still hanging onto his skates, Stewart tried to make his way up to the surface of the garbage, but the footing was bad. He climbed a pile of coffee grounds, but near the top of the grounds, it gave way under him, and he slid down and landed in a pool of leftover rice pudding. I bet I'm going to be sick at my stomach before I get out of this, said Stewart. He was anxious to work his way up to the top of the pile because he was afraid of being squashed by the next canload of garbage. When at last he did succeed in getting to the surface, tired and smelly, he observed that the truck was not making any more collections, but rumbling rapidly along. Stewart glanced up at the sun. We're going east, he said to himself. I wonder what that means. There was no way for him to get on the truck, out of the truck. The sides were too high. He had to just wait. When the truck arrived at the East River, which borders New York City on the east and which is rather dirty but useful river, the driver drove onto the pier, backed the garbage scow, and dumped his load. Stewart went crashing and slithering along with everything else and hit his head so hard he fainted and lay quite still as though dead. He lay that way for almost an hour. When he recovered his senses, he looked about him and saw nothing but water. The scow was being towed to sea. Well, thought Stewart, this is about the worst thing that could happen to anybody. I guess this will be my last ride in this world, for he knew that the garbage would be towed 20 miles out and dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. I guess there's nothing I can do about it, he thought hopelessly. I'll just have to sit here bravely and die like a man. But I wish I didn't have to die with egg on my pants and butter on my cap and gravy on my shirt and orange pulp in my ear and a banana peel wrapped around my waist. The thought of death made Stewart sad, and he began to think of his home and his mother and his father and mother and brother, and of Margalo and Snowbell, and how he loved them all but Snowbell, and of what a pleasant place his home was, especially during the early morning with the light just coming through the curtains and the household stirring and waking. The tears came to his eyes when he realized that he would never see them again. He was sobbing when a small voice behind him whispered, Stewart. He looked around through his tears, and there sitting on a Brussels sprout was Margalo. Margalo, cried Stewart, how did you get here? Well, said the bird, I was looking out the window this morning when you left home, and I happened to see you get dumped in a garbage truck, so I flew out the window and followed the truck, thinking you might need help. I have never been so glad to see anybody in all my life, said Stewart, but how are you going to help me? I think that if you hang on to my feet, said Margot, I can fly ashore with you. It's worth trying anyway. How much do you weigh? 3 ounces and a half, said Stewart. With your clothes on, said Margot. Certainly, replied Stewart. Then I believe I can carry you all right. Suppose I get dizzy, said Stewart. Don't look down, replied Margot. Then you won't get dizzy. Suppose I get sick to my stomach. You'll just have to be sick, the bird replied. Anything is better than death. Yes, that's true, Stewart said. Hang on, then. We may as well get started. Stewart stuck his skates in his shirt and stepped gingerly onto the tuft of lettuce and took a firm grip of Margot's ankles. Already, he cried. With a flutter of wings, Margot rose into the sky, carrying Stewart along, and together they flew over the ocean and headed toward home. Phew, said Margot, when they were high in the air. You smell awful, Stewart. I know I do, he replied gloomily. I hope it isn't making you feel bad. I can hardly breathe, she answered. My heart is pounding in my breast. Isn't there something we could drop to make you lighter? Well, I could drop these skates, said Stewart. Goodness me, the little bird cried. I didn't know you had skates hidden in your shirt. Toss those heavy skates away or we'll both come down in the ocean and perish. Stewart threw his skates away and watched them fall down until they disappeared in the gray waves below. That's better, said Margot. Now we're all right. I can see the towers and chimneys of New York. 15 minutes later, they flew in through the open window of the little living room and landed on the Boston Fern. Mrs. Little, who had left the window up when she missed Margot, was glad to see them back, for she was beginning to worry. When she heard what happened and how near she had come to losing her son, she took Stewart by the hand, even his clothes smelled nasty, and kissed him. Then she sent him upstairs to take a bath and George out to take Stewart's clothes to the cleaner. What was it like out there in the Atlantic Ocean? inquired Mr. Little, who had never been very far from home. So Stewart and Margot told all about the ocean and the gray waves curling with white crests and the gulls in the sky and the channel buoys and the ships and tugs and the wind making a sound in your ears. Mr. Little sighed and said someday he hoped to get away from business long enough to see all those fine things. Everyone thanked Margot for saving Stewart's life, and at supper time Mrs. Little presented her with a tiny cake which had seeds sprinkled on top. End of chapter 9.